Good morning, friends. Today we are going to discuss about our mental states. And let me tell you something before we start the sessions. Uh, uh, when carefully apply this think this carefully applied thinking energize your mind or exhaust it. And most of the time we think about the energy and exhaustions. And one of the most important rubrics in homeopathic repertory is mind mental exertion. Some people can think, study, and analyze for hours without difficulty, and others become exhausted after a short period of mental work. They may say, thinking gives me headache, my brain feels tired on after studying, and I simply cannot think anymore. On the other hand, some individuals actively seek intellectual challenges and enjoy complex mental work. In homeopathy, this rubric is not merely about intelligence, it reveals how the mind and the vital force respond to sustain the mental efforts. Sometimes the key to understanding the patient lies not on what they think, but on what happens when they start thinking. So this is one of the beautiful rubrics in our repertory, mental exertions. And it occupies the highest position in homeopathic repertory because it describes the patient's reactions to sustained mental efforts and intellectual activity, concentration, reasoning, and cognitive work. So there are many rubrics like the intellectual, intelligent, learning, which describes mental capacity. But this rubric's mental exertions focus upon the consequence and the experience of using the mind. And then this mental exertions may give you the aggravations, maybe or impossibles, and they are under the sub-rubrics. And so we will be discussing in all these things in details. So human civilizations uh, uh, is built upon the mental exertions. As we see that every scientific discovery, philosophy, system, medical advancement, and artistic masterpiece requires sustained intellectual efforts. Yet individual differs greatly in their response to mental work. Some thrives under the intense intellectual activity, others rapidly becomes exhausted, and some desire constant mental engagement. Other avoids it completely. The rubrics mental exertions capture the constitutional differences. So the rubrics concern not merely the intelligence, but individual capacity to sustain and tolerate the mental activity. So we have to ask what happens after prolonged thinking. Does concentration cause fatigue? Does mental efforts aggravate the symptoms? Is intellectual work enjoyable or burdensome? The answer will often reveal deep constitutional traits. The word mental is derived from the Latin mens, which means mind, intellect, and thoughts. And exercence is derived from Latin ex-ray, meaning to put forth effort and to apply energy to exercise power. So mental exertions means applications of mental energy towards thinking, concentration, reasoning, and memory or intellectual activity. Now, in the Indian historical perspective, we see that in ancient India, education recognized mental exercise as a discipline in the Gurukul system. The students developed concentration, memory, reasoning, contemplations, and mental efforts was viewed not merely on academic or not merely on as academic activity, but as a character and development. So classic examples are Panini, Aryabhat, Charak, Susruta, Adi Sankaracharya. They demonstrated extraordinary intellectual endurances. In the international perspective, also we see that throughout the history, intellectual achievements dependent upon sustained mental exertions. An example includes Greek philosophers, Renaissance scholars, scientific pioneers, mathematicians, and theologists. So these traditions emphasized the disciplined thinking and mental training. In the religious references, Hinduism, mental discipline forms the part of Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and so are that. And mental efforts is viewed as the means towards the self-realization. In the Buddhism, right's effort includes disciplined cultivations of mind, and in Christianity, study and contemplations are considered spiritual discipline, and Islam seeks knowledge requires sustained intellectual efforts and reflection. The philosophical understanding of this rubric, it raises profound questions. Why can some mind work tirelessly while others fatigue rapidly? The answer lies not only in intelligence but also in vitality, motivations, emotional stability, and constitutional makeup. The mental efforts represent the interactions between mind, body, nervous system, and the willpower. The psychological analysis requires several faculties like attention, ability to focus, concentration, ability to sustain, and memory, retention of the memory, and reasoning is logical processing, and executive functions, planning and decision making. And when these systems become strained, symptoms emerge. Now, there are many sub-rubrics under this rubric, which we'll see that mental aggressions aggravate, one of the most important rubrics. Mental work worsen the symptoms like the headache, irritability, confusion, vertigo, fatigue. Expressions are thinking makes my headache worse, mental work exhausts me, and clinical importance is high. Then aversion to dislike of mental efforts. The patient avoid intellectual activity because of the fatigue, weakness, depressions, poor concentration, and lack of confidence. I don't want to think, and mental work feels burdensome. Then mental exertions difficult. So mental efforts can be profound, but only with the difficulty. So they are slow thinking, mental resistance, and poor efficiency. And for them, the thinking requires great efforts. Then mental exertions bring fatigue. Mental work rapidly exhausts the patient, mental weariness, inability to continue, desire to rest. My brain feels tired. I cannot think anymore. Then it is mental exertions impossible. A most advanced state, the characteristics is inability to study, inability to concentrate, cognitive collapse, and the expressions is I cannot think at all. Then desire for. It is an important positive rubric. Characteristics is enjoy intellectual challenges, seek mental work, and desire study and analysis. And expressions are enjoy difficult thinking, and mental work energizes the patient. Now the patients usually express that common statements are thinking give me headache, I get mentally exhausted, I avoid mental work, I love solving difficult problems, and my brain becomes tired quickly. After studying, I feel drained. So clinical significance of these rubrics appear in student, professional, research, chronic fatigue state, burnout syndrome, nervous system exhaustion, and post-illness weakness. Then cross-reference is the intellectual. The intellectual describe orientation, and mental exertions describe response to mental work. Intelligent describes capacity, and mental exertions describe endurance. Learning concerns to acquiring knowledge, and mental exertions concerns effort. Then concentration difficult, focus cannot maintain, and mental exertions may remain possible. And dullness thinking. So thinking itself becomes impaired and often more pathological than in the mental exertions. And thought wandering while studying. This is attention drifts. Mental exertions may still be present. And homeopathic importance is that we have to discuss about the mathematic and the remedy and other aspects also. So now coming to the mathematic analysis, chronic mental states are fundamental themes are efforts with limitation. The patient wishes to think and study but feels inadequate, and characteristics is mental fatigue after study, and fear of failure, intellectual insecurity, anxiety regarding the performance. And the patient may say, I try hard, but I worry I am doing not enough. So mental work is tires me quickly. So common remedy are calcarea, or the silesia. Then psychotic expressions are fundamental theme is excessive efforts and overcompensation. The patient constantly puts the mind, characteristic in performance, perfectionist, over study, excessive planning, inability to stop thinking, and patient says, I must complete everything perfectly. My mind never rests. And like Thuja, Medorinum, and Nectrum Muriticum. Sorry, Nectrum Sulf. And then syphilitics are breakdown of mental power, mental collapse, inability to think, destructive hopelessness, and intellectual despair. And patients are, my brain has stopped working. I cannot think anymore, like aurum metallicum, syphilinum, and mercurial. The tubercular are restless intellectual activity, excessive curiosity, rapid thinking, mental overactivity, exhaustion from stimulations, and patients will say, I want to learn everything and my thoughts never stop, like phosphorus, tuberculinum, and caliphos. The remedy are caliphos, important remedy, the great remedy of the mental exhaustion, perhaps the most important remedy under the rubric, nervous fatigue, mental frustration, inability to continue study, and weakness after intellectual. And patient will say, my brain feels exhausted, I cannot think work. The keynote is mental exhaustion produces nervous exhaustions. Lycopodium are they have exhaustions with the lack of confidence, intellectual ability present, and fear of failure, anxiety before performance, and mental fatigue after efforts. Expressions, I know the subject, but I fear I will fail. So keynote is confidence despite the capability. Calcarea card, mental exertions produces fatigue, like slow comprehensions, mental overloaded, and fatigue after study. And expression is, I thinking tires me, and keynote is mental exertion work exceeds the available energy. The phosphorus are rapid mind with the rapid exertions and brilliant understanding, social over-exertions, nervous exertion, expressions, I enjoy thinking, but I burn out. And keynote is a quick expenditure of the nervous system. Nectrum Muriticum, silent intellectual worker, prefers solitary mental work, deep concentrations, and mental fatigue from prolonged effort. And expressions are, I work best alone, and keynotes are intense private mental activity. Sulfur is another important remedy. They are intellectual thinker, philosopher thinking, theoretical analysis, profound reflections, and expressions is I enjoy thinking about principles. Keynote is mental exertions arises from the intellectual intelligence. Now there are many sub-rubrics that we have already discussed. So let us go into the other parts like case-taking identifications. The physician should explore educational history of the patient, did mental work causes fatigue, then occupational history, how does the patient tolerate intellectual work, does concentration remain stable, fatigue pattern, when does exhaustion appear after, how much mental effort, and emotional response like enjoyment, anxiety, aversion, frustration, and physical consequence, headache, eye strain, sleeplessness, and nervous system. The clinical expressions, the patient will frequently say, thinking makes me tired. After reading, I need rest, and mental work give me headache. I enjoy solving difficulty. I avoid intellectual work because it exhausts me. These spontaneous statements are often important in the high repertorial fluid. So we have already discussed about its relationship with the other rubrics like intellectual, intelligent learning, and other rubrics. So these rubrics become very useful when mental efforts consistently produces symptoms. The reaction is characteristic, and mental fatigue is prominent, and intellectual work influences the health, and symptoms reoccur repeatedly. And this should not be thought of about when fatigue is temporary. Symptoms occur only during acute stress, and educational difficulty is merely environmental, and mental exertion is not characteristic. So Dr. Henneman has emphasized of understanding the entire person's mental exertion reveals vitality, nervous strength, adaptability, and constitutional resilience. The patient response to thinking may be as characteristics as physical symptoms. A patient who thrives on intellectual work differs fundamental from one who collapses. Therefore, this rubric often becomes a valuable constitutional indicator. For the clinical interpretations, we have to see what happens when you think intensely rather than are you intelligent. The ulcer may reveal fatigue, aggravations, exhaustion, avoidance, nervous exhaustion, and intellectual ambitions. So this mental exertion is one of the most valuable rubrics for understanding the relationship with mental work and constitutional health. And sub-rubrics provide insight into the patient cognitive endurances, mental vitality, and nervous stability. And proper differentiation from the other cross-reference is essential to get into the exact meaning of this. So when carefully, rapidly applied, this rubric helps the physician to understand not merely how the patient thinks, but how the patient vital forces respond to the very act of the thinking. So friends, this is very important rubrics for our learning, and because we all are engaged in the mental work, and what happens after the mental work, that is the important things that is reflected through this rubrics only. So with this, I conclude the sessions, and if you wish to listen me in Hindi also, you can go to my Facebook or YouTube channel where you can get many more rubrics. So with this, today I conclude the session. Thank you very much.